Welcome, everyone, to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and today we're going to continue the ROI Calculator little mini-series we've got going on, focusing on the family library correction steps here. That's the entire focus today, is correcting your family library in Revit. Now, of course, as always, our webinars are recorded. So you can always come back to this and review it in the future if you want to sort of follow these steps yourself and see how this might affect you within your BIM management environment. Also, as always, for those of you who are participating with us live here in GoToWebinar, I'm going to encourage that you throw your questions in the QA window related to today's topic. And I'm going to try to answer those live while we're going through the discussion, if it makes sense. And if not, of course, we save a QA session to the end, for those who are participating with us live in this presentation. So without further ado, let's jump in and take a look at today's topic. So in a previous webinar, we introduced the tool on our website, the ROI calculator, that kind of shows you potential automation steps within our CTC suite of tools. And the whole goal here is to help you maximize your return on investment in the tools that you purchase from CTC. We want you to know where you can actually, some key areas where you can really gain some benefits. Now, in this webinar in particular, we're going to dig deep into a very particular workflow that really kind of affects many of us in the Revit space. I mean, here's the scenario. We've got years probably of time under our belts building up our Revit family library, our standards environment, and we've kind of spent a lot of time, or maybe we inherited a library where a lot of time has been spent. Now, here's the deal though, as time has passed, we and our peers in industry, we learn a lot of lessons. And there's usually a lot of room for improvement on our libraries where standards have changed, where things have evolved over time. The problem is manually implementing those changes can be really time consuming. In fact, it's so time consuming most of us just don't do it. And the other problem is if we do try to do this by hand manually, it's actually just fraught with human error because we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I'm sure, none of us are really perfect here. And it just takes a lot of time and it's error prone. But here's the deal. Today, I want to talk about a series of tools in this webinar that are going to show you how you can potentially not just save hours, but quite literally months or potentially even years of just manual labor and get this job done quickly. I'm going to show some of this firsthand so you can see how this works live. You can see how these tools relate to each other and how in this workflow you can get from one suite or two suites of tools a return on your investment. In fact, I'm going to use 4 individual tools today, or talk about 4 tools today. So the whole goal here is that we're going to be getting rid of these manual processes and turning it into a much more automated workflow and repeatable workflow on into the future. So that's the focus of today. We're going to go through 4 specific objectives. I want to talk about the issue that we run into in detail. In fact, I'm going to demonstrate some of this from the ROI calculator, and then I'm going to actually outline some of the issues. We're going to outline the steps for doing the workflow by hand, and then I'm going to show how we automate that. I'm going to demonstrate the workflow in practice so you can see how fast this can be. And then we're going to talk next steps so that you can understand how you can implement this workflow directly into your company with the tools that are available here. That's the whole goal today. All right, first off, let's start by identifying the issue. I'm going to start by going to the web page, and from the web page, we're going to go through the ROI calculator like we've done before and talk about a particular tool kit or a particular workflow. And I'm going to expand upon what even the ROI calculator says you can use and talk about more tools. So how do we get there? From the resources page here, resources menu item, there is an ROI calculator that shows up in that little web dropdown. From the ROI calculator today, I am focusing on building tools. So this is architecture, MEP, structural, and building construction. Within there, there's a series of task lists that are available. And the one that I'm going to focus on today is family library correction. We're going to fix some issues with our family library. Now, this ROI calculator only recommends one tool in particular. Now, there's actually 4 tools in this workflow, but the most important one, the biggest one that saves the most time, is what's actually going to be shown in an ROI calculator result here on this page. And that's important because sometimes when you look at a tool, there's other related tools that can go along for the ride. So let's take a look at some realistic numbers that we can play with here. On average, I find that it takes about a half hour per family to open it up and to manually correct it. That could be swapping parameters for your shared parameters. It could be updating formulas, might be changing instance and type, might be changing groupings, might be modifying and fixing some materials, renaming materials. There could be a lot of things that are involved in that. There's some manual things as well, but we're not talking about those that can't really be automated. We're talking about those things that can be automated and that can easily take up to about a half hour per family to fix. I know this number is real because I actually had a company in recent past who sat down with this exact effort in mind to fix portions of their family library where they were having inconsistent scheduling, inconsistent user experience with the content, inconsistent parameter names. It was just frustrating across the board. And they sat and had a real-time experience of 1/2 hour, 30 minutes on average per family to fix it. Now, at the time, in their environment, they had 4,000 families at that time. They probably have more now. And they had one person sitting down doing this task. And the goal was to go through and do a repair cycle on this content for, within a year, in a year's time frame, less than a year, hopefully. But with the maths here, 30 minutes per family, 4,000 families, that's 2,000 hours of time. That's a lot of time to sit there and do this work. In fact, that's a full billable year. And at their typical billable rate at the time of about $100 an hour, that's $200,000 in cost or opportunity cost that they could have been better spending that time in another way. If we're talking just about, say, the cost of the person sitting there, let's say they make $20 an hour, let's say it's $30 an hour, whatever that number happens to be for you, you can put that in. And this is the actual, observable cost. But again, you're discounting the potential opportunity cost. If you bill out at $150 an hour on projects, and you're not doing that project work, but you're doing something else, that means you're not making that profit. That's lost wages, that's lost revenue for the company. That has cost if you're doing this task in place of this task, which is why many of us just don't do the fixing of our libraries because it takes too long. Well, here's the deal. By using the BIM Manager Suite from CTC, and specifically the most important tool in there is the family processor, by leveraging that tool at an average of 1 minute per family instead of 30 minutes per family, that's 30 times faster. Now, we're going to see it's actually going to be faster than that. It's literally going to be 1,000 times faster because in my example with that person that I was talking about, 30 minutes a family on average, 4,000 families, we told Family Processor to run with the exact same settings that they were doing by hand, and it finished in 2 hours. So 2 hours versus 2,000 hours, it literally is 1,000 times faster. But even at this number here, if it did take a minute per family, that still has a time savings of 1,933 hours and a cost savings of a revenue potential there of $290,000. Even if we were talking about billable rates here, $20, $25 an hour, whatever, it's still $48,000 in savings on actual cost if you were to go through the exact process that I'm going to talk about today. So this is what we're talking about. This is the kind of potential savings with this workflow. We're putting real numbers to this and potential numbers to this. We're putting this together so you can see by using this tool, when you set it up and use it right, it's going to save you hours upon hours and thousands upon thousands of dollars. This is real. This is companies have bought this for this exact purpose. I want to get that point across. Now let's dig into the actual issue that we're running into here. What is the real issue? Manual family correction, the .rfa file manual correction, is incredibly tedious. It takes a lot of time. After you've corrected it, you have to manually validate those updates. That can be tedious as well. It takes a lot of time. And again, both of these are error prone. Time spent manually making these changes is time not spent as a BIM manager on other management tasks or not spent on project work, right? You're not getting the revenue or the benefits of your time invested in another way, in a better way than doing these tasks in a manual way. So this opportunity cost, I mean, we talked about this a moment ago. We can really identify that opportunity cost using that ROI calculator, making sure that you understand if you have to spend your time one way, you can't spend that same time another way if it's your time. It's a finite resource. So we're trying to give you back time, save that time so you can invest it better in other ways. The other major issue here, again, is that manual correction and manual validation is incredibly error prone. This means that you may end up making the same changes multiple times. And that also is a fairly significant issue because errors cost additional time and those count as basically a hidden cost. You don't really realize it, but you're spending the time twice doing the same task, and that could be a lot of time. Instead of a half hour per family, that could turn into an hour per family, and you don't necessarily realize it if you're doing it manually because we take little bits of time here and there, but that little bits of time, that adds up, and that's huge. And there's other issues that come into play as well, because if we don't fix it, there's other major delays that can happen by these inconsistencies. Also, while we're doing it manually, delays can often be caused and errors can be caused because of inconsistencies and distractions. So the whole goal here is to eliminate these manual steps, these manual issues that we run into by automating the full process. So let's outline what are these manual steps. This is like a 10,000 foot view, by the way, of these manual steps, but I want to give you an idea of what they look like. First off, with Revit content, you need to harvest all of your families and get them into a consistent location. We want them all in one source of truth, one collection of content. So you have to get them all together. This might mean harvesting families out of old projects. This might mean taking multiple silos of content at different stages and kind of getting them all collated together. That's one step, usually manual. I have a way to automate a lot of that. After we've done that, we need to, by hand, if we're doing this manually, open each individual family and validate what's going on inside. Does it schedule? Does it not schedule? Does it have extra parameters? Are they grouped right? Is instance and type set right? All that manual validation is, well, it's manual, right? And we have to spend time one by one checking this on a checklist, hopefully, so we can make it as repeatable as possible, even though, we're humans and we make mistakes periodically. That's just the way it goes. So we have to investigate for correct parameters, correct settings, correct formulas, all that stuff. And then after we've made modifications, because we will be making changes, we have to save each family and then later on validate, of course, that these updates are correct in a project within a schedule. So that all takes the time, and that open each family and investigate and correct the parameter settings and formulas, that's where the biggest time crunch comes from. That's where that half hour per family comes from. Getting the families in the first place, we didn't even quantify that. Saving each family and validating, we didn't quantify that either in this step. We just talked about this one thing here, but I'm going to talk today about automating quite a lot of this in a big way. So let's demonstrate this live. I want you to see how this can work with all the settings in place, with all of the tools at my fingertips, at my disposal. And then after we talk about, me demonstrating this live to you, how this could work with all the settings in a sort of simplistic environment, I want to go into next steps and actually show you how you can create this. Because I don't just want to get you all excited and not leave you the tools. We're going to actually show you how these work today so you can make this repeatable. So I'm in Revit over here. I'm in a project model. And in this environment here, I'm going to be focusing today on doors. And the reason I'm focusing on doors is because I'm noticing here that many of my doors aren't scheduling correctly. Lots of blanks in my schedule. Now, I don't necessarily know exactly which doors these are. Well, I do actually know exactly which doors these are because I prepared for this today. But, say you didn't, right? You could easily open up a floor plan view. You could pick a door. I can know that this happens to be on level 2. These happen to be on level 1. I can have the two views side by side. In fact, let's do that. I can go up here to my general floor plan. I can do a window tile. Let's close my starting view here. Let's do window tile again. If I was to pick on one of these doors out here, any one of them, we'll just grab this one at random. Okay, it highlighted a door right here. and I can tell then what this door is. This particular door, if I select it, it happens to be called doors underscore int double flush. This is not my standard naming convention. I don't usually put underscores in my names. I use hyphens instead, personally. So you might have a different naming convention. That's fine. I also don't like prefixing with the category. I feel that's silly because I already know it's a door. So I don't prefix with categories. I have better ways of organizing that. So I know the naming conventions off. So this is obviously not my normal doors, but they're in use in this project and obviously quite a few places. So my first step is then to harvest these out. So I would go grab the door, probably do edit family, save it someplace, and then I go find the next door that maybe is problematic. I don't know where that one might be. There's a doors exterior double flush out here. Just pick this guy at random. Where is it? There it is down here, right? So it's a different door. I might take this door, edit that family, save it out. Again, I can see a similar naming convention, doors underscore. So it looks like that's a repeating theme on some of the doors in this particular project. And there's probably others at play. But that's a manual harvesting process, and that's just the doors, right? So what I like to do is I like to automate that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Once I do get into a family, I can't edit out of a project directly. That's not the, I forgot to turn that tool off. Whoops. Let's try this again. If I do edit family, see if that lets me get it. I forgot what my passphrase was. That is fantastic. Glorious. Well, we're going to cancel that. Normally I would edit the door and work with it, but in this case, it's not letting me do that. That's fine because I've got that. I got another tool turned on that stops me from editing things out of projects in a bad way. I just can't remember what my passphrase was, which is silly on me. Regardless, I would go into that door and I would make changes to it. Then I would, open up individually parameter by parameter, and I would investigate whether or not those parameters were mine. I can actually, just looking at a lot of these, see that they're not, but some of them are similar enough that maybe I don't know, like frame material or frame finish. So I would need to go in there and manually correct that by swapping the parameters. And then once I'm done making those types of changes and fixing, instance versus type and whatnot, like this frame material should be a type parameter, but the finishes should be an instance parameter in my environment. Once I go through and correct all that, I would save the family and then I would reload it back in. Insert, load family, and I would browse to where that family was and I would load that in, or a series of families, back into my project. And then I would just visually validate that it works over here in the schedule. But that middle time of me manually editing those families, that takes a lot of time, right? That's quite cumbersome if I wanted to do that. In fact, if I go down here to doors underscore, I'm going to see if I can cheat the system a little bit here. Doors underscore exterior double flush. That was the one. Let's save this to a location. I have a saved directory here. Family correction here. Let's just save it. Yeah, perfect. I can do that. I can save it out. I just can't edit it out, which is fine. So I can now open up that family. Let's go there. Temp, family correction, this guy. Open this up. Ha! Can't edit families because I blocked that as well. That's fine. Great. Regardless. In fact, I need to turn that off. That is going to just get shut down now. I should have done that ahead of time. We'll fix that so that it doesn't actually stop me from doing anything. Those of you who are BIM managers, hopefully you're the only ones watching this. You'll know how to disable this if you have a single user install here. Autodesk, Revit, and 2020 add-in. It's the wrong folder. Revit add-ins. There we go. And we're going to turn off project standards. Disable that. Now, when I restart Revit, it will not be doing those checks anymore. So that is the manual process, though, for fixing that manual workflow. And we're going to go through and demonstrate an automated workflow now, 100% automated by using tools. That's what this is going to next little step's going to be when I restart this. Revit 2020 is what I wanted here. So automated workflow coming up. With this automated workflow, I'm going to show you all those manual steps that I just went through, basically 100% automated by using a couple of tools. 3 free tools, 1 paid tool. And the paid tool, of course, is the family processor. But there's 3 free tools in the mix that we're going to be leveraging here to make this as efficient a workflow as possible. First things first, I want to harvest my content out of the project as quickly as I possibly can. So the way that I'm going to leverage this once this project model opens up is from the CTC Productivity tab, I'm going to use the BIM Batch Suite. The BIM Batch Suite has a really powerful little tool here. Finish opening, thank you. There we go. Called Family Exporter. Instead of me needing to go and one by one expand my families list and save them out one by one down here by right-clicking and doing save individually and saving it to a particular directory one at a time, because I can't take like all of my doors and save, and I can't grab all of these that have a specific underscore, right-click and save, can't do that. And if I was to save from the families directory here, which you can do, it saves every single family out indiscriminately to one folder, not organized. So it's kind of frustrating to have to deal with it that way. So I like to do a bit more of a surgical export, a very intentional export. So here I'm going to go to my doors, and I could grab all the doors, but I'm going to explicitly grab the doors that I know don't follow my standards, which are these with the underscore inside of here. Those 5 are what I'm going to be dumping out. There's others in the mix that I could probably dump, but these are the ones that I want to focus on right now. I'm saving them into my family correction directory, and I'm organizing it by geometry and category. So if I was to go into this directory here and say, maybe I want windows as well, and I want to dump a few of these windows out, maybe this guy, whatever, I can dump them as well, and they're going to go into a model Windows folder versus my doors going into a model doors folder. And it saves me needing to manually organize these in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and save those families out. In fact, in this case, I'm saving out 7 explicit families. And if I go into my folder where this is expected to be for today's little discussion, and I'm going to delete this one that I manually had saved out. In the model folder, there's now a doors and a Windows subfolder. In the Windows folder, there are the 2 that I asked for in an automated way, and the doors folder here has the 5 families that I saved out that are doors. So very directly, it saved them to a specific organized folder, and I can do this multiple times from multiple project models and get one final source of truth of all of my content. I could choose to export everything if I really wanted to from my families directory. That's pretty easy to do. If I was to go back into here and I said like, hey, I want everything, I could check everything and just export and let it rip everything out. So 270 families all organized by geometry and category. And I could do that in multiple projects if I needed to harvest multiple families out. So it's actually a pretty quick little step. That's part 1. Part 2, if I already have my settings at play, and I do, I'm going to fix a bunch of families. Now to use this, I'm going to go into a single family file, and it doesn't matter which one. I'm just going to pick a table here, just have a family open. I'm going to use the family processor command here. This is the powerhouse tool that's going to save us that 2,000 plus hours if you've got 4,000 families at play. What I'm going to do within here, I'm going to start with some brand new settings so that I have nothing kind of sitting out, and I'm going to open some settings that I use very regularly. I've already got some door correction settings at play. This is specific to doors. That's what I'm going to be focusing on today. But these door settings, I could just as easily use this for all furniture. I could have like a fix everything settings that I might want to use. I might have, maybe Windows specific, maybe furniture specific, maybe air terminal specific, you name it. You can have individual settings, or you can have a corporate fix all settings if that's what you'd like to put together. Building the settings file is a one-time thing. You build it up, you tell it to fix these things, you can run it against thousands of families if you want to, and it doesn't take very long. In fact, we're going to see it happen here. So I'm going to load up these door fix settings. This has a few things in it. It's auditing every single thing that it's going to open. It's going to automatically set units of measure based on a template family that I have set. It's going to organize my parameters by name alphabetically in each of the groups when it's all done. It's going to be deleting a bunch of trash materials that you just get in your families when you save families out of a project. You always get this trash, and it just increases file size unnecessarily. It's also going to add a specific material. This is one that I probably wouldn't do if I was doing this for everything. I wouldn't be adding a particular material because I don't want that same material in all my families, most likely. Though in all of my families, I do change the default material to be sort of a green, transparent, glassy color so I can quickly see if my materials are improperly applied just from previews. I'm going to be changing a bunch of parameters. This again is door specific, so I'm going to be deleting a panel material value. I'm adding panel material back in as my shared parameter, and I'm establishing a copyright value here. My family parameters, I'm not adding any there. I'm replacing a bunch of parameters. I'm changing a few things, and I'm basically going to pick a bunch of families and tell this to rip through and just do it. So I didn't make any changes. I was just introducing you to what was going to be happening. Normally I would say open settings, select families, pick the families that I want to process. Let's just make sure I have all the right families here. Let's get rid of these out of my list. Remove all items, and I'm going to grab all these from my family correction directory. Oh, there's windows in the mix. I don't want those. I just want the doors in this case. I'm going to add the doors to my list. I'm going to be going through and creating a new shared parameter file automatically. That's going to get dumped into my family correction directory in case I find trash parameters. It'll add them to this list. So I can know additional changes maybe I need to make. The type catalogs are going to be built from these families, so I can rip all the types out, delete them, and basically have type catalogs available that my team can use. And I'm just going to tell it to go. So let's continue with all of these settings that I told it to change. I've pre-built them up. I know what they are. I don't have to make them manually. It's going to start ripping through and building all of these together. Oh, I have the wrong shared parameter file. And oh, that's why. Okay, interesting thing. When you save families out of a Revit session, oddly enough, Revit likes to lock those families in memory, so I can't automate a process on them. No big deal. All I'm going to do is just shut down Revit and restart it again real quick. Don't save my project. Let's reopen Revit one more time here. Get this open back up. Usually when I'm doing this, I'll have two sessions of Revit ready to go. One that's open, one that's got my project, one that I do my family's work in, and that way the two memory channels kind of don't cross in the computer, and Revit doesn't realize from one session to the other session that there actually was a family open. In this case, I had to close it down because I was turning off a particular add-in that was warning me about not doing certain things that I didn't want it to be warning me about here. So let's do family processor. Try this one more time. Cool thing about family processor is it remembers all of your settings from your previous session. So I don't even have to reload my settings. It already has all my settings inside of here. It even has my selection of families, which is fantastic. Resaving the families, let's just let it rip now. Continue processing. There we go. So it's going to go through the 5 families here and make all those changes. Each of these families takes approximately 15 seconds. So in my example earlier where I said it was 1 minute per family, not quite right. In this case, it's about 15 seconds per family or 10 seconds per family. It depends on how big the family itself is and how many changes I'm actually making. But this particular workflow here, this is nearly done, and the big bulk of my time, where normally I'd have been spending about a half hour per each one of these families, is going to be done in about a minute. So that's pretty quick, right? It's done, and it gives me a log telling me all the things that it did, and if there was any issues for whatever reason, it'll let me know. Now, the issues it's running into is it was trying to change a text value for copyright to copyright CTC 2023, which I should actually update to 2024. It can't change it because that value is actually being driven by a formula. So that lets me know the formula was set correctly, and I should verify the formula value. It's also trying to add in a value called fire rating. This is from back in the day before doors had a real fire rating parameter. And so it's just saying it can't actually put that in there. It can't replace that because a built-in parameter called fire rating is already there. And so it's not going to be replacing it with my shared parameter. And that's okay. That's something it couldn't do anyway, and it just let me know that. That makes me happy. There's very few other issues here. It's just about the fire rating and copyright values, so I'm basically done. So with that, I just fixed 5 families in particular. Now, one thing that I like to do is after I've processed these families out, and in this case, you'll notice I have type catalogs for each one of them for their type values. You'll notice these previews are inconsistent. The family itself had some random preview set for it, and I want my previews in my directory structure to all be consistent. So I'm going to use one other tool to verify and establish all of my previews. It's actually a free tool in the BIM Manager Suite called Family Preview Manager. I've already pre-configured all of my settings. So here in my options, all of my appearance settings are exactly what I want them to be. So all I'm going to do is just tell this to batch process a bunch of content here, which is going to be my C drive, temp directory, family correction directory. It's going to grab all the families that it finds inside of there, including the windows in this case, and I want them all to have consistent previews. I'm going to overwrite the original family and just tell it to process. And so it's going to rip through each of the families, open them, create a preview, resave each one of them so that in case my preview view wasn't set well, now it is. And actually every one of my families now is going to look nice, neat, and clean. You can even see it's refreshing the previews right here. The only ones that don't look great are those that are openings because they didn't have any graphics in 3D. My families typically do, but the out of the box or whatever this source of these families are apparently don't have that. So whatever. My other families all look good here, including if I go into my Windows directory, if I set my view to medium icons or large icons here, you'll notice they're both consistent as well. So I've got all of my previews done. That's one part of my workflow. I like having my directories look good and clean, and now they all look good and clean and consistent because Family Preview Manager, a free tool, helped me fix that in a matter of seconds. So I, so far, did exporting. I did correction of my parameters and materials and a bunch of stuff there and resaved my families and compacted them after an audit. It's all good to go. I updated all of my previews. That's good to go. And now, if I want to, I can turn around and take those exact families that previously were not working, and I can force reload them right back into my project. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and add a project here. This is going to, let's just research this directory. That was my architectural model that I was working in. Go ahead and OK that. I'm going to grab a bunch of families, just research these directories here. Wrong folder, that's why. Let's go to the correct folder here. It's my temp directories where I put these. Family correction. We're going to grab all the doors that have recently been resaved. Go ahead and OK that. I'm going to force load all the families back in, every single one of them. I don't care because I know this project had them all. I could choose to only reload them if they already existed and only reload types that already existed as well. But I'm going to force reload the entire family. I'm going to suppress the overwrite dialog box. It's going to overwrite and the existing version and its parameter values with my new values if I set them. Automatically save, sync, and close that file. And all I have to do is click load. And if I had, say, 3, 4, 5, 6 Revit project models here, BIM 360 project models here, that's fine. It's going to reload these now corrected families back into any models that I have listed. That, again, free tool. So we talked about 3 free tools and 1 paid tool, 1 licensed, officially licensed tool here. And I just did a day's worth of work in a matter of minutes while I was talking to you and saved myself all kinds of headache because I had my settings ready to go. So we're going to let this finish up. Oh, that's actually already finished. Let's just close this down and go validate this real quick. Let's open that project model. This guy right here, which was actually just saved, 12:33 Central. That's what time it is right here on my computer today. Go ahead and open this up, creating a new local. And we're just going to validate. My work sets dialog box opened up over here. Let's get these all opened. And we're going to go validate inside the schedule that those doors are now working better. If you remember, there was a lot of blanks in my schedule, a lot of empty rows of data, especially on level 1. There was a whole bunch of them. Well, we just fixed this. We reloaded those families, and let's go validate here in the door frame schedule if it's better. Not perfect. There's probably some doors that I missed apparently here, but all those in the middle here, they're all fixed and ready to go. They may not have all the data populated because I haven't put all my information in for panel types yet. I didn't put a frame type in, but it has the fields and it now has my data and my materials, and we're basically ready to go with this content ready to rock. So it's a lot better and saved me a lot of time from manually fixing those things. So really, what are the next steps for you to build this workflow yourself? How do you do this? Because I don't want to just leave you without like ways of doing this yourself. So let's talk through a bit about how I configured some of those settings. Now, the free tools are actually pretty easy. You saw me use those live. Those are pretty straightforward. In Revit, up here, productivity tools, the BIM batch suite, the 2 free tools, exporter and loader, you've actually already seen the full workflow for them. There's not a lot of settings to have in place. They just automate the manual tasks. So I could go to export, I choose what content it is I want. Maybe I search for underscores in names, and I go find here the underscore named doors. We did that already. I choose a directory, and I choose how I want it organized, and I click go. That's pretty easy to go through and do. So there's not really a lot of settings there. On the reload process, same thing. I choose a project to reload into. I choose fixed families to load, and I basically choose my options that I want to automate and click go and let it rip. That's pretty straightforward as well. I am going to talk about the other easy tool here, which is Family Preview Manager, because again, it's free, and we're going to talk about it real quick, and then we're going to dig into the big tool last year, which is Family Processor. We're going to go through a few strategies you can use for that. So Family Preview Manager, big thing to do here is check your options. Within options, you want to make sure that you know what the name of the preview view that's going to be made in that family, what that view is, and you want your general visibility settings to be configured the way that you want, basically turning off items that you want turned off in a preview view, things that normally wouldn't be turned off, like host elements, like connectors. If you're doing MEP content, those connector objects can be turned off. Light sources can be turned off. So you can have those items turned off or on. Maybe you want them on, maybe you don't, but you can choose those options. Also, as far as the orientation of the view, you can go here to Appearance Settings and choose your default orientation. So by default, I like 3D right front top, which is pretty standard. I like shading with edges at a fine detail level at a view scale of 3 inch equals a foot. Or if you like the metric scales, you could do something like 1 to 2, something like that. 1 to 5, whatever you want, right? So in my case, 3 inch equals a foot. I additionally went over here so I could have some extra templates for special cases. For wall hosted stuff, let's make one real quick here. Let's call this wall hosted 2. For wall hosted items, I may want to have a different preview orientation. Generally, wall hosted objects are modeled with what I'm air quoting on my side as a front face is actually the back face of the wall. The placement side is the exterior face of the wall, which is the back. So I like using 3D left back top or right back top for my wall orientations, which is different than my defaults at right front top. Actually, I do use left back top. That's what I use typically for wall hosted stuff personally. Again, I want shaded with edges. I want fine detail level, and for doors, 3 inch equals a foot works really well. So I made that template, and then I went over here to my categories, and I specifically found items that should be in that list. Now, I've already got wall hosted doors here in my official wall hosted list with the exact same settings. But if I was to say grab a face-based door object, I could go ahead and add it into this list here, into this wall hosted 2, for example. But it's telling me doors, door category that is hosted by this kind of object, face-based, or unhosted or whatever, they're going to be a part of this template. When these kinds of families are seen, it's going to follow these rules instead of the general default rules. That's all this really means. I'm going to delete this wall hosted 2 because I don't want it in my settings, and those 2 items are going to appear back over here again. You'll notice that I have a detail items one. I took detail items from my categories and added them to a particular view. For detail items, they're 2D elements, they're 2-dimensional, and I wanted them to have a different rule set. I want them to show from a sort of a floor plan 2D view because they're 2D anyway. I want the default display style there to be a hidden line at a fine detail level, and I want a different view scale. I want 6 inch equals a foot because they're such smaller objects. I want them to look really good at a really small size with good line weights that are going to be generated in that preview. So I use 6 inch equals a foot here, but you can change your settings to whatever you'd like. I also made a special ceiling hosted one, which looks at the view from 3D right front bottom. So it looks under the ceiling. So I'm looking from the face that would normally be seen, like lighting fixtures and air terminals and things like that. Shading with edges is turned on, fine detail level once again at the same scale, 3 inch equals a foot. But you can go through and you configure these however you like it. Okay. So once I have this done, I'm going to go ahead and save my settings so I can recall them. I'm going to save them here into this FPM settings file right here that I actually just made earlier today. I'm remaking it right now, just saving my settings so that in the future I can reload that or load this on different machines so that they all have the exact same general settings and appearance settings inside of here to really make sure that my families are good and clean. Also, when I generate family previews, I like to go ahead and clean up my backups. That's a personal option here, but what this will do is delete all the .00 files. So when I'm making previews, after it's done, it deletes the .00 whatever file that would have been generated and any other previous ones as well. So once I have those settings, you basically add a bunch of families to this list and tell it to go, and it'll basically build you all your previews. Every single family will be opened and saved with the new preview, in this case in Revit version 2020. And then, of course, you can choose to upgrade those into the future if you want to and use that preview view when you're upgrading, because you now have an actual 3D view or 2D view in the family that's called preview that has all these settings pre-configured. And in the future, you can just use those settings as you're saving your families now. You can load them into projects, save them out, whatever, and they will have those views that you can reuse on into the future. Once again, free tool. So really powerful thing that you can use. Now let's get into the actual configuration here of the family processor. This is an important process because this is where really the bulk of the ROI tool comes into play for today, is this family processor side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up all these settings. We're going to start brand new from scratch, and I'm going to take you through a series of things that I like to do to make my workflow as efficient as possible. There's a lot of things you can do in Family Processor, and we already have intro videos. You can go to our little videos link here, and that'll take you through a full, detailed, comprehensive introduction to Family Processor. I'm going to give you a few things that I like to do just generally. I always audit when I'm opening up family files. Always, 100% of the time, especially if it's going to be upgrading content, I always audit it. I like having specific units of measure set within my families. I like having inches as my default unit of measure rather than inches and feet, because it's just easier for me when I'm working in those smaller family environments. So here, if I go to my default settings, I have a family that I've already built called template.rfa. This family has every single unit of measure set exactly the way that I want it. My angle values, my airflow properties, my electrical properties, everything inside of here, my length values, everything is set just units of measure the way I want it. You'll notice it's a very small family. I've just called it template.rfa. I should probably call it units template.rfa. But with that family, what it's going to do is it's going to set all units of every family that gets processed here to match exactly the units of measure from template.rfa. This basically does a transfer project standards for the units, but it makes sure that my families are going to run consistently. That's great. I also personally always sort parameters by name within groups, just some general stuff that I always do. So I always go check, 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 and I set the path for this to a template family that I know has good units of measure that I want to use repeatedly. That's a part of my saved settings when I save this in the future. In my case, looking at a bunch of stuff here, there's going to be a bunch of default materials that are going to show up inside of here. Now, this particular family that I'm looking at, it doesn't have a bunch of garbage in it. It's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. It does have things like default light source in a table family, which is silly, and default roof wall and walls. That's kind of weird also. It's got some of these weird settings inside of here, and I could add those to my list. But you can also harvest from other family files junk that you get. So I'm going to go use one of those windows that I know is a problem that I didn't actually process through here a moment ago. So if I go into my Windows directory, I know there's a window here and it's got trash in it. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that family, and notice all this garbage that is in that family. It's discovering it from that family. I'm going to select everything with the exception of default. All of this other stuff is pretty much garbage. I'm never, ever going to use it, and if it gets discovered, I want it gone. So I'm going to go ahead and add this to my delete materials list and just have all that trash always cleaned up out of every single family. I know I don't use them. If you use them, that's fine. Don't add them to your delete list. Like if you use glass, great. Remove that from your list if you use this glass material. I can get rid of it. Everything else in here that's dumb that I know I don't want, I'm just going to get rid of it because it's garbage and it takes up space. I'm probably not going to add any materials to my default list here of mass fix across the board. But in the case of my doors workflow, I did add a WD material because I knew it was a property of something. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to build in a change. That default material, I leave that in every single one of my families because I know it's always going to be there. And what I do is I change the R and the B values to 0 for the color, and the G value here I leave at the 127. This gives that material sort of a minty green look to it. And I change the transparency to 50%. This way, when I'm building a family, if somebody is just using the default material, has no material assigned correctly, it'll look like that glassy green. And since my previews are shaded with edges, I will see transparent glass green in my families, and it looks terrible. So I know that I need to go fix those families. And I see it from my preview because all of my model families show in a 3D preview view. So this way I can really quickly identify if I care about materials that they're garbage materials at play. And then I know to go into those families and do some extra work that I have to do by hand to make a material with all the right properties and assign it to the right things. The big tab here is the change parameters tab. This is the most important one. Again, there's going to be parameters that you may want to delete. Old trash that has wrong units of measure or bad naming conventions. You can go through the exercise of deleting those values if they're found within the families. You can choose to add shared parameters from your shared parameter file that you've got mapped here. Now, this is something that when you clear your settings, Family Processor doesn't actually get rid of. It leaves this here in the list because it assumes you have a single shared parameter file that you're going to use repeatedly, so that doesn't get cleared. You're going to one-time browse this to your real master shared parameter file. From here, if I wanted to always make sure that every single family has a copyright parameter, I can add that to my list, and I can tell it to go into the correct group. It's actually pulling from the shared parameter file the group that it's in. Even though it's a text parameter, it will default it, since my shared parameter file is well organized as well, it will default it to the identity data group when it adds it into my family. That saves me extra clicks and manual corrections. If I want to, I can put a manual formula here, like copyright CTC software 2024 or something, whatever. You can put whatever you want there, and it will establish this parameter and make the value CTC software 2024. For any families that I'm processing, one of the other things that I like to do is also make sure that I'm changing the copyright parameter value. So I'm going to go in here and say, show me copyright again, and I'm going to make sure that it's always set to a new formula of copyright CTC software 2024 out here. I got extra stuff in there when I copied that. I want to make sure that it always says this, and make sure in case my other families are not set correctly, that this is set intentionally to the identity data group. And in this case, for my copyright value, this is always supposed to be a type parameter for me. So I'm establishing that just in case other families that I'm processing through didn't have the right value. So I can add parameters here, in this case, adding it as a type with the right formula. But if it already existed, it wouldn't be able to add it, and it would tell me that. But it will do is it will change it and update it so it has the correct formula, group, and instance versus type setting. So you can do that. You can also do replacing of parameters. So if you're ripping through a bunch of families and you have width and height and length and all kinds of different stuff inside of there, if your shared parameter file has those exact same parameters by name, I can simply add them here and it will auto map them. If the names are different, maybe there's unit height and you want it to just be height. Well, then you can drop this list down and go find a length parameter from your shared parameter file and map that very intentionally. So you can go through the process of exactly making every single change that you want, deleting junk you don't want, adding shared parameters you do want, replacing with shared parameters in case existing ones are already there and you want to swap them to yours. Build that list up. And again, just like I did for the materials up here, I sourced a list of parameters from other garbage families. I can always select from family files and it will farm them for parameters, and I can use those in my list and say, hey, I'm noticing that they have this parameter. Make sure that it's my shared parameter so I can swap it out. Really powerful, fast workflow. And again, you can always change things if you want to change things. You can change values of stuff, update formulas, move them to the correct group if they're in a wrong group, change the instance versus type. So for parameters that may already exist and weren't created, and even if they were replaced, that's great. You can always make sure that they have exactly the settings that you want them to have 100%. I like doing that with my whole copyright value here. So from year to year, I set that, or from version to version, if I have a version parameter. Do I have one of those? Maybe I do. Version? Yeah, version number. So I have a text parameter that goes into identity data. If I have that parameter, I can set it to a particular version. Maybe I'm processing it right now, 2024 01 03. I like to version based on the date and an iteration there. So I can put that in there if I want to. That could be my version number. Anything that does not have a current version number, I know hasn't been fixed. If I see that in a project, I know it hasn't been fixed. Now, of course, I have to make sure that that shared parameter exists in every single family. So I want to make sure I go to version as well. Version, there we go, version number. Make sure that it exists there as a type parameter. I could set its formula to a value if I wanted to, but it doesn't really matter because it's getting changed over here. If I was wondering if there was like a version property or a something, family version, whatever, and I want to swap it for the correct one, I can do that as well. All of these steps that you would normally do manually, one by one, you can make sure Family Processor does every single one of them. Ultimately, here you can control exactly the order in which this happens as well. So one of the things that I like to do is make sure that I'm replacing with shared parameters before I do the change parameters. So I add shared, add family if I need to, replace with shared, and then I set my parameters to change at the very end so that it's all consistent. You might want to do this in a different order. That's up to you, but you can control the order in which every single one of these tabs actually process. Ultimately, at the very end, I can tell it what to do here as well. Like I always create type catalogs. I don't include instance parameters in the type catalog. I delete the types from my families intentionally. I sort my types alphabetically in my shared parameter file. I always resave families even if no changes are needed. So if it opened with an audit, even if nothing was changed, it still saves the family and compacts it. So it's a good, clean save. There's other things you can do here. You can override the preview image using that preview view if it's found, and it will guarantee that the family is saved with the correct preview, assuming you have that view in there. Doesn't care if it's a 3D view or a 2D view. With Family Preview Manager, I made the view called Preview, and I'm basically using that view in every single one of my families when I process them. One other thing that I like to do is I like to harvest shared parameters. So if there's shared parameters I didn't know about in these families, I harvest them to a brand new file when I'm doing this so that I can basically make an additional round of changes and add to this master list for things that I want to correct. So I'm going to basically have a shared parameters found text file here where it will farm them out of the families. Now, I didn't show this to you, but up here in family correction, there are shared parameters that showed up in this list. From those families, there were parameters that were still in there that weren't in my master shared parameter file for whatever reason, so it farmed them out here, and it's going to let me then make some extra steps if I need to fix those particular families from these found shared parameters. So ultimately, I'm going to save my settings. I'm going to save this 100% to a fix. This might be something like a master CTC fix process or whatever you want to call it, and it's going to save it as a .rfp settings file. In the future, before I start doing a massive fix, I'm going to open those settings and then make any minor tweaks I need or add to it in a big way and resave those settings. So if I harvest a bunch of families out and I already have a pre-baked collection of things that I know that I want to fix 100%, I simply open my settings, grab thousands of families from a directory, begin the process, and grab lunch. And when I get back, it'll probably be done. And all I had to do was let it rip on a computer. It's fantastic. It saves me so much of a headache when all I need to do is just run through and make those corrections. And I can make those corrections as many times as I need to before I even turn back around up here with the productivity tools and reload those back into a project, or potentially even better, after doing that, save them into Hive, into the CMS, so that there's easy ways for people to get these corrected families in the future, right? So instead of me spending a year doing correction, I'm spending maybe an hour getting ready for it and then letting it run on my computer when I'm grabbing lunch or going to a meeting, and I'm done. That's it. It saves me so much headache. That's literally thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars in savings. So hopefully you understand some of those next steps that you can take to actually build this workflow for yourself. So with that, for those of you who aren't going to stick around for the QA session, or for those of you who are viewing this as a recording, I want to say thank you. We hope that you found this really meaningful and useful for your daily workflows. We hope that you come back for more in the future. Certainly subscribe to our YouTube channel if that's where you're viewing this. You can also go to ctcsoftware.com on our events page. You can participate in these with us live as well.